We'll go into some of that shortly. I just want confirmation that the webcast can start. And it is on. Okay. Welcome to the meeting of the first Policy and Resources for this new term. And congratulations to everybody here, on being either made a member, a chairman of a select committee, or else being asked to join this committee. The important thing is to enjoy what goes on here, and I'll be talking more about scrutiny after the two Louises have done their presentation on scrutiny. Right, apologies for absence. I'm glad to say I've noticed that one person who was going to not make it has now made it. That's Jackie Porter. But could you please inform us who's given apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have received from Tom Thacker.
Right, and we have, I thought we had one from Elaine Still.
Sorry, I'm Elaine Still.
Elaine Still?
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
Now we have Councillors Derek Miller and Zoe Huggins standing in their place today. Is that correct? Zoe, could you put your hand up, please? This is to help the deputy, the acting deputy here, and Derek. Okay. I have asked, in the absence of Tom Thacker, who is the vice chairman, I've asked Councillor Peter Latham to act as the deputy chairman for the morning. And I'll say at this point, if you want to be involved in any of the questions or debate that is going to crop up, and I hope they're going to be a good one, could you please catch his eye, not mine? I'm interested in the debate. I'm not interested in who wants to speak next. But Peter will be writing down your name, okay? Declarations of interest. I remind members that if they have any declaration on any item to be discussed today, to declare it now or at the time that the item is discussed. 3, the minutes of the last meeting. Hopefully you can see them in front of you on your screens. This was the meeting of the 4th of March, and which was a virtual meeting. Let's just go through for being true and correct. We have page 1, which are items 168, 169 and 170. And page 2, which are items 171, 172 and 173. Are there any matters arising from those minutes for those 4 who are still on this committee? No. Those attending happy with the minutes for me to sign off? Yeah. The word agreed will be handy. Okay. And I plan to come in at some point when we're allowed to, and I'll be signing off all the minutes of the last year, which have already been agreed virtually. Right, Chairman's announcements. Sorry, deputations. We don't have any, and we haven't received any for this meeting, have we? Okay. Chairman's announcements. Right, a sincere welcome to all the new members. There are 8 of you. That's quite a big change for any committee. And I'd also like to welcome those who have returned. There are 5 of us. And I'd like to welcome all our officers and cabinet members here today. The cabinet member who's attending is Stephen Reid, who is the cabinet member for the executive member for commercial strategy, human resources and performance. Thank you for that. And I do believe Keith Manns, our leader, is listening in on YouTube, and there may be one or other cabinet members doing that.
I think Councillor Forster is as well.
Councillor?
Forster.
Councillor Forster. Okay, excellent. Well, welcome to Councillor Manns and Councillor Forster. I'd also like to welcome our officers here. We have Deborah Harkin. We have Antonia Perkins. Of course, Deborah, as you know, is the Assistant Chief Executive. We have Antonia Perkins, Head of Customer Engagement Service, and Peter Andrews, Head of Risk and Information Governance, who I believe is dealing with the Ombudsman Report. Is that correct? Okay. As I said before, I've asked Peter Latham to be the acting Vice Chairman. I'd like to thank all those members who served on the Policy and Resources Committee and who, if I can put it, are no longer with us who are no longer with us because they're not county councillors anymore. Okay. They are Adam Carew, Fran Carpenter, sorry, those who may have been promoted, okay? Roger Huckstep, Anna McNair-Scott, Russell Oppenheimer, Bruce Tennant, Michael Westbrook, Andrew Gibson, Chris Carter, and of course, the redoubtable Keith Evans. So I'd like to thank all of them for all their service in the previous 4 years. Just to bring you up to date, I've served as chairman on this select committee since June 2013. 2 years taken off for being vice chairman and chairman of county council. I also learned the basics of scrutiny as chairman of Best Value when that existed on the county council in the early years. That was the beginning of scrutiny as we knew it. Best Value on Environment, as it was called in those days. I left the role to serve in cabinet for 7 years. Prior to serving that, I headed up scrutiny for a couple of years at my district council. I also chaired scrutiny on the Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority for 1 year before the Secretary of State decided that we ought to have fewer members attending. And when scrutiny was first invented during the early Labour years, we were all sent up to Birmingham for a week to learn how to deal with it. So it was a very interesting week. So it kind of looks like I'm stuck with this for a bit. I plan to say a few words about the scrutiny function after our officers, that's Louise Reid and Louise Pickford, have said the bit on item 6. I have a request for officers because we have a lot of new members. If you're going to use any acronyms, would you please make sure they're spelled out so that the members know what you're talking about? Because I'm going to allow them to interrupt presentations for clarification. So if an acronym is used and any of you don't know what it is, it doesn't matter if you're the only one, please put your hand up. It's purely for clarification. And you'll probably find that if you don't know it, maybe others don't know it either. Okay. Right, the format. I expect some debate to take place on items 7 and 8. There are 1 or 2 councillors who have already rung me to say that they want to talk about certain items, which we'll come on to. When we have the presentations, that's the time to put your hand up, and Peter here will take your name. But let's pretend that the first question or the first debate starts on a particular subject. I want to stay on that subject. I don't just want to take all the hands up in order. It's done by subject. So we will ask at that point if there are any other people who've put their hands up, if their hand is up for that subject or not. They will then wait until that subject is dealt with, and then we'll go on to them. And that means that we actually we can drill into the important issues as they come up. So it's not a matter of who's got their hand up. The important thing is what's the matter that we're dealing with. That's what's really important. So any questions so far? Right, item 6. Have I missed anything yet? No. Item 6. The introduction to the Select Committee in governance. We're about to receive a presentation on the process of Select Committee work on policy and resources from Louise Reid, the Assistant Head of Legal Services, and Louise Pickford, on my right, Democratic and Members Services. And please, I presume you, Louise, are starting. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. Hello, yes, I'm Louise Reid and I'm a solicitor here at the County Council. And as the Chairman has indicated, I will be co-presenting this with my colleague, my Dams colleague, Louise Pickford.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Shall I move it a bit closer?
Just move it nice and close, yeah.
I don't want to pull it out. Is that okay? I'll move it. Right, yes, looking at the background, obviously the Chairman has actually just gone through some of the historical background to scrutiny, but the introduction of formal scrutiny committees was in 2000, along with a move to the newer, well, as it was then, executive arrangements, and by that I mean the move to a leader and cabinet model. There is a legal requirement to have at least one scrutiny committee. Here in Hampshire County Council, we call them select committees, and we have chosen to have 5. They cover different thematic areas, broadly linked to the main service areas. So in terms of role and purpose of scrutiny, a very important function of the select committee is to hold the executive and the council to account, which includes the power to make recommendations to the executive or the county council arising from the scrutiny process. Select committees also have a broad advisory role in relation to the functions of the county council and matters affecting the locality of Hampshire. And for this purpose, select committees conduct research and analysis of policy issues and options through the establishment of working groups, which run alongside officers' work, influencing recommendations made to the executive, assisting the executive and the county council in the development of the budget and policy framework. Moving into the terms of reference of this particular select committee, the key executive members are, as you'd expect, the executive member for policy and resources and the executive member for commercial strategy, estates and property. Key departments, mainly corporate services, but also CCBS and the county council as a corporate entity as a whole. Your remit includes coordinating scrutiny, which I'll come on to in a minute, but also scrutinising corporate functions. And I think it's probably worth taking the time just to look at these individually. So this includes a wide range of corporate functions, efficiency, human resources, skills, partnership working, procurement, financial management, asset and estate management, information management, communications, use of IT, health and safety, corporate policy and performance, the business units, crime prevention, crime and disorder, and emergency planning. And as a select committee, you will review how policies, services and decisions ensure the effective use and management of all resources, and how effectively cross-cutting and corporate policy is being developed, implemented and performance evaluated, as well as improved. This select committee also reviews and scrutinises decisions and actions in connection with crime and disorder, and obviously it's worth just looking at that one because that involves external bodies. So this is in connection with the discharge of crime and disorder functions by authorities responsible for crime and disorder strategies in relation to Hampshire. And in this you have the power to make reports or recommendations to the county council with regard to any matter which is a local crime and disorder matter affecting all or part of the electoral division for which an HCC member is elected. As I mentioned earlier, I was going to come back to this. This committee has the role of coordinating the scrutiny function across the council, and that is to ensure the effective resource allocation between the scrutiny committees, and that review reports issued by the different select committees are consistent and that they take account of corporate issues. P&R Select Committee must ensure that outputs and outcomes of scrutiny are having impact and being evaluated. You prioritise topics for scrutiny thematic reviews. And in this, you're responsible for agreeing the appointment of all the working groups to advise select committees. In terms of output, you also provide an annual report to the County Council. And part of your oversight role includes monitoring the operation of the provisions relating to call-in and urgency. And you may submit, that may involve submitting a report to Cabinet if necessary. Delving a little more into how you hold the Executive and the County Council to account. As it says on the slide, there's scrutinising decisions which the Executive is due to consider, so that's known as pre-scrutiny. You scrutinise Executive decisions that have been taken before they are implemented, and that's call-in. And you also scrutinise Executive decisions after they've been implemented. That might be shortly afterwards or as part of a wider review of policy to measure their effect. The County Council is unusual in the way that it operates its scrutiny function. The County Council has chosen to hold Executive member decision days in public, and that involves reports being published 5 clear days in advance. And as a consequence, it's possible for select committees to pre-scrutinise Executive member decisions. And in this way, the Executive member, who tends to sit in on select committee meetings, is able to take into account your recommendations and observations before making the decision. This is therefore much more proactive and collaborative than a system which requires select committees to use the power of call-in in order for your recommendations to be taken into account by an Executive member. And the County Council considers this process allows for select committees to better influence policy development, which leads to better decisions. However, the select committee does have the power of call-in. Where necessary, and is able to call in certain decisions that have already been taken to scrutinise them further before they are implemented. In effect, this has to be done very quickly. This power may only be exercised within 5 working days of the date that members are informed and notified of the decision, and then the Select Committee must meet within 14 days.
I have a copy of the slides here. You seem to have jumped
Skipped
a slide.
one. I'm going to come back to it.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Okay.
Thank you. I didn't mean to skip it, but I will be coming back to it. So I'll finish off with call-in as I've started it. In terms of call-in, the options are the Select Committee must decide whether or not to recommend that the decision be reconsidered by the relevant decision maker, or where the decision is not in line with the policy or budget framework, to recommend that the County Council consider whether the relevant decision maker should reconsider that decision. Any decision which is not in line with the policy and budget framework cannot be implemented until the call-in process has been disposed of. That's why it has to be quite quickly dealt with. One thing to bear in mind, that urgent key decisions cannot be called in, although they can still be scrutinised by the committee, because as we saw earlier, the Select Committee has the remit to consider any executive decisions after they've been implemented. That might be shortly afterwards or as part of a wider review of policy to measure their effect. So just slipping back to the slide that I missed. In terms of scrutinising and reviewing either decisions in pre-scrutiny or post-decisions having been made, what are the things that you're looking at and looking for? Well, certainly it's very important to look for the evidence base for the decision, or the proposed decision, and how sound that is. You would also be considering whether any appropriate consultation that should have taken place has taken place. You would look to see whether the decision reflects the County Council's priorities, and you would always consider what options had been considered by the decision maker. That actually concludes my part of the presentation, so I will pass over to my colleague Lou.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, members. I'm Louise Pickford from Democratic and Member Services.
Get it closer to your mouth.
Sorry. Is that better? Can everyone hear me? Yeah, thank you. I'm Louise Pickford from Democratic and Member Services, and I'm here to talk about the rest of the slides, so that in terms of the agenda for your select committee meetings, any member of the committee can put an item on the agenda as long as it's within the remit of the committee, so that it doesn't venture into other areas of the, say, children's or the culture select committees, so that any member can put forward any item either to myself or to the Chairman, Councillor Glenn. Any member of the County Council can refer a matter to the Select Committee provided it is relevant to the function of that committee, and that the Executive or County Council may request that a committee considers the matter referred to them. So the topic suggestions. Suggestions are welcome at any time to the Chairman or myself, and indeed last time at the last Select Committee we members requested that we invite Openreach to give a presentation on their gigabit coverage, and indeed an item was raised by, I think, Councillor Jackie Porter on the Hampshire perspectives, which is part of your agenda item report today. So that any request for an item on the agenda is made clear, the reason for the request, and again it indeed meets the remit of the committee. And indeed, if any member wants to raise an item for information, there is the member briefing programme, which is held monthly. Thank you. The agenda is a rolling work programme, but there are items during the year which are set so that in January the committee considers pre-scrutinises the budget of the executive member. And I think in January also there is an IT update, and as is today, there is in the June meeting the corporate performance update and plan for you to monitor progress against. Next slide. What will success look like? Well, the work programme is led by members, so the scrutiny function is therefore member-led. The work programme should be realistic, flexible and focused, and I think apart from the other select committees, the P&R Selective Committee does have spots where items can be put in at short notice. Topics are prioritised appropriately. Reviews are well scoped and project managed to ensure they are timely, improvement focused, and time and resources directed where it can add most value, constructive and evidence based. So in conclusion, the role of scrutiny is wider than simply holding the executive to account. And indeed, if there are items that members want to really delve into, they just need to put the request through to the Chairman or myself. So it's much more than holding the executive to account. There needs to be effective dialogue between scrutiny committees, the executive and key officers to ensure that work of committees contributes to policy setting and decision making. Thank you.
Thank you both, Louise Reid and Louise Pickford.
Are there any questions?
Once I've finished, okay?
Sorry.
Can you wait? I'll just do my bit and then do the questions, okay? Do you know all the names, by the way?
I think so.
Councillor Crawford, Councillor Davis,
Yeah.
Councillor Miller,
Yeah.
Huggins,
Yeah.
Burgess,
Yeah.
Makata, North, Withers at the end.
I'm all right.
Yeah, you know, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the third time I've introduced what I believe let's say the scrutiny from the councillor's point of view, okay? Because what you've heard is very much the way scrutiny has been set up over all the years. So I'll just go through my list, okay? Our work is to scrutinise, obviously policy, but it's also to hold the executive and cabinet to account. So there'll be some repetition, but I just want to, let's say, get what I think the salient points are across. It's very important it's not political. Now, actually, this is the first time I've seen the members of the committee spread around. And it's very healthy. So we don't have a political party sitting as a phalanx together. It's a much healthier way of dealing with the matters at hand. The principal reasons for it not being political is that it's got nothing to do with scrutiny. Scrutiny is a team work. It's the work of a team, all of us, to ensure that what's going to Cabinet is actually the right recommendation. And if it's not, then it's up to us to say. We are not a rubber stamp for the administration. Now that might be quite difficult for those who are in the administration to stomach, but we're not a rubber stamp. We need to question anything that we're not happy with. What's more, political dogma doesn't have any interest as far as our officers are concerned, and I don't want their time wasted. The full council and cabinet are the places for that sort of thing, or even on the doorstep. The subject matter is key, not the political affiliations. We welcome all questions, especially new members. Now, I want new members to feel relaxed about this. I don't care how dumb or stupid you may think the question is that you've got to ask, because if you're going to ask it, there'll be one or two others who may feel the same, okay? Just ask it. New members are quite often the best people on scrutiny. And I want to hear what they've got to say and what they've got to ask and what they've got to debate. It doesn't matter how simple it is. It's a very powerful committee that we've got here, and that's important to remember, because we are the committee that basically will make recommendations to Cabinet and, if necessary, to full council. And that's important to know. The 4 C's are the ones I'd like you all to remember when you are, let's say, in between meetings. Comparing, consulting, competing, and challenging. That's basically our work. Comparing, consulting, competing, and challenging. If those aren't self-explanatory, I can have a discussion later with you. When we come to, let's say, criticising, or let's say questioning what's going on in the County Council, we have to remember we have to act as a critical friend. So respect for each other and respect for officers is paramount. So there are ways of couching terms when you're not happy with what's going on in a way that does not demean either ourselves or the officers who are basically doing the work. We are free to pass on work to other select committees if basically it's the remit of another select committee, and we can do that through the chairman that we have here. On the same, we can also take work from the Cabinet. If they feel that they've got a dilemma that they can't handle, they'll pass it on to us, and then we'll deal with it. As Louise Pickford said, flexibility is the name of the game. So, for example, I'm very happy to have ad hoc meetings, even if not all members can get to it. Because if something flares up, like, for example, a pandemic out of nowhere, we might want to have a meeting. We might want to have a meeting about it, just one subject. So I'm happy to get suggestions from members at any point about any subject or any, if it's important that it has to be dealt with sooner rather than later, an ad hoc meeting can be set up. We can delegate work to small subcommittees or task and finish groups. I try to attend, with the permission of the chairman, all the other select committees. So basically, I do know what's going on out there prior to this meeting ever taking place, and it's quite useful. And therefore, when we have these meetings, then we kind of know what's going on out there. And I would recommend that all members of this committee, if they've got the time, and it's easier when they're virtual meetings, to listen into some of the work of the other select committees. We can co-opt people if we feel that we haven't got the expertise amongst us to help us with our deliberations. We can co-opt people. Now, I know that's been a debatable subject with officers, but we can discuss that at some later date. But I'm all for bringing in people who actually know their subject to help us with questions and debate. We can call up and call in expert witnesses. If you look at some of the history of this committee, we've had the chairman and the chief executives of the LEPs here, really for us to find out what they're doing. And it's been fascinating, and the interest in the questions were very thorough. We can do site visits. We haven't had many of them, and of course, the last year, that hasn't been going on at all. But if we have a problem that we want to deal with, and it's better to be dealt on site, let's do it. I don't plan to have any meetings on sunny beaches, okay? Okay, but unless, of course, we've got a problem with a beach. but please bear in mind that they don't have to be held here in serried ranks. And so, therefore, we can have meetings outside or certainly in other buildings. Subject matter. It's very important we drill down on subject matter. So I don't mind how long it takes on any particular subject, as long as everybody has their say and feels happy with the discussion that's taken place. The work programme. Now, this isn't just invented by officers. We need your input into the work programme. There are certain statutory duties that we have to do, so there'll always be something to discuss throughout the year. But if I can quote one of the issues that came up, we had broadband. When broadband was being brought out, there were problems in certain parts of the country, the countryside, where it just wasn't happening. Anna McNair Scott brought the subject up, and we actually got the IT boys in, and Openreach were invited to come and talk to us about where they thought the difficulties lay. So if you've got a beef and it's not parochial, so I'm not really interested in what's happening in your district if it's basically just one, down one street, that can be dealt with in another area. But if it's something that will be an overarching problem for the whole of the county and for the whole of the council, then we can deal with it. So the work programme, we can have quick wins with the work programme. Then we can deal with short-term gains, mid-term gains, and long-term gains. So it doesn't matter if one subject can go on for a couple of years. We don't want to rush it just for the sake of getting through it. We will deal with it. And it'll come back to committee whenever we deem it necessary. Right. If you've got anything, if you want to get ideas through to us, please contact me, the Vice Chairman or the Acting Vice Chairman, and Louise. All three of us would be handy, and then we will discuss this between us to bring it in at the right time. Call-in powers. I'll just repeat what Louise Reed said. Call-in is done for three particular reasons. One is if any decision that's been made is against policy. Two, if it's against budget. And three, if there's a lack of information, which is usually the common reason for call-ins to take place. I am aware of one or two that have happened on the County Council. None have happened on this committee yet. I'm assuming that's because we have a system whereby we have these meetings prior to the executive making a decision, and there's time for discussion to take place between the two. But it's a good system, but it's not perfect. The important thing to remember is we can make recommendations, we can't make decisions. We can't tell the Cabinet what to do, we can only recommend to Cabinet what they should be doing, or changing a particular drive that they've got. All press releases will be done through the Chair, the Vice Chairman in my absence. And one thing that's often forgotten, and it might crop up today on items 7 and 8, certainly item 7, if you think it's important that we cross-examine, as a critical friend, the executive member for any shortcomings that we deem exist in his or her department, we can ask that executive member to sit up here and take questions, just as you see in Parliament. We have that power. Now, I don't recall us ever having done that, but please remember we can do that if we want to discuss particular policy with the executive member. And that's why politics has to remain outside of this room when we're having these discussions. The important thing is brain power. We need your thinking ability, your brain power to drill into these subjects so we actually have a meaningful debate and a meaningful outcome at the end of it. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my presentation on how scrutiny should be done. Are there any questions? Yes, Alec.
Thank you, Chairman. I was interested to see that crime and disorder was one of the functions of scrutiny here.
This closer to you.
Sorry. I'm in danger of pulling it out, I think. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. That crime and disorder was one of the functions of scrutiny here. For 3 years, I was a member of the Joint Scrutiny Committee for North Hampshire on crime and disorder, and I don't recollect them ever having made any reference to anything being scrutinised at the Hampshire level. My particular concern was the crime and disorder associated with the street attached, particularly in Aldershot, where I represent. But I think that may be a problem in other towns as well, and I wonder if that's something that the committee could perhaps gather information on from the other joint scrutiny committees around the county.
We look at crime and disorder once a year. We do not have the power to scrutinise the work of the PCC. That is correct. But I don't recall us ever having sent on to that committee you're talking about any deliberations that we've had. Is that
No,
true?
you're quite correct, Chairman. The scrutinising body for the police is the Hampshire Police and Crime Panel. So the remit for here would be, we normally get updates from the Hampshire Strategy, I think it's Safety Strategy Partnership Group, which is made up of all other local authorities, and they work together with the police and other outside bodies to bring forward details in their area, and then we get an update as the select committee of what they've done throughout the year and how it's worked and whether it's been successful or not. But down to your question, I think the scrutiny power lays with the police and crime panel.
Sorry, if I may, Chairman, what I'm pointing out is that there's no feedback to these. In my experience, there was no feedback to the local joint scrutiny committee of any conclusions that Hampshire had come to in terms of what reports they'd made on back to the joint scrutiny committee. So to me, if it's going to be scrutiny, it needs to be a two-way street rather than we just accept reports from the joint scrutiny committee but don't give them any information back.
Look, thanks, Alec. I take your point, and it's something we'll certainly bear in mind that when we later in the year when we do the police and crime and disorder, remind us of this, okay? And we'll, if there's anything coming out of that we think should be passed on, we'll do it. Okay, thanks for that. There was another hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got a question about calling. I think this is probably for Louise Reid. My question is, do we publish in a readily accessible form the history of what has been called in, what decisions by different parts of the county, or the councils have been called in and looked at, and the reasons why they've been called in? Because certainly I've tried to find it, and I haven't been able to find it, and I can't quite work out why we don't put that in a readily available format for both councillors and for members of the public to work out where obviously a calling implies something hasn't gone quite right, and I think we need to be quite open and transparent about where those occurrences were, and I've tried to find them and I can't. Am I looking in the wrong place?
Well, maybe it doesn't. Louise, can you help me or any other officer?
I've not been involved in the calling myself, but my understanding is that once the committee call it in, then they have 14 days to receive that request, and it's at those meeting day papers which are published on our calendar of meetings page, as you normally see the agendas. That's where the historical information will be received for the committee to then to get that update to make that decision on whether they do want to call it in. So it's part of the calendar of meetings. So there's no one heading which says call in, past decisions or anything.
It's the list he wants to know about. It's
Yeah,
the
I
list.
don't think it
That's
exists,
exactly
but I
my
take your
point, that I don't want to look through every committee every time. I'm interested in how regularly Hampshire County Council has a call-in of decisions made by the executives, wherever they are, by the executive members.
Louise.
What I would just remind you, it's part of your function as a select committee to oversee call-in by all of the committees, all of the select committees, so that would be presumably on your work programme to do that at some point in the year.
It's not currently. But
Can you actually tell Councillor Makata where he looks to get this information?
If you are doing it at a certain point each year, then it will be because you will have then obviously collated everything and pulled it together. So that's something to consider as part of your work programme.
It's an important one. Councillor Makata is new to this committee, okay? He's a fairly new county councillor. There are some brand new county councillors here. They've got absolutely no idea where to go and find this sort of stuff. We need to make it user-friendly. You know, I wouldn't mind having a look at all the call-ins that we've had over the last 40, 50 years. Right?
I think, Chairman, we've probably only had about 5.
What I'm gathering, obviously I haven't
It's not
historically supported this select committee, but what I'm gathering from what Lou is saying now is that hasn't been on your annual work programme, so it's something that would have to be done to pull it together for the historical call-ins, but perhaps from going forward, it's part of your work programme to oversee.
That was my experience the last 4 years, trying to find it. I found it very hard to find out any examples of where call-ins had happened, and I think I was looking at the right place on the committee minutes, and I couldn't find it. And then maybe there weren't any. That's quite possible. I was interested to know that there weren't any.
We did have a call-in in Children and Young People
Yes.
over the past 4 years. Councillor Porter will be able to tell us all about it. In the last 2 years? Okay, maybe I only attended one.
I'm going to ask people not to have private conversations, please. There's a committee here.
Sorry. Just to say they existed over the past term. But I agree, it's very hard to find and you have to dig around on the website and look through endless minutes. It's not clear.
Right, that's useful. And were there any other questions? Do you feel that's been answered? Okay. Any other questions on scrutiny? Function of? Right, ladies, thank you very much for your presentations. If you're not, I mean, the rest of it's going to be fascinating, so please stay.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I don't have a meeting, but otherwise I would.
Right. So noted, and comments taken on board. The screens go up, so oh, right. Councillor Collett, Adrian.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to commend the way you run scrutiny on this committee. I think the presentation you've made this morning has explained it very well, and I totally respect the sincerity of what you're trying to do here, and I think if we can all work together, we can have the best chance of making the best of this. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Collett, and we look forward to the next 4 years. And I'm sure you speak for everybody. We're moving on to items 7 and 8, which are going to be presented to us by, and they're going to be presented together by Deborah Harkin, who is going to be helping understand the presentation, our Assistant Chief Executive, Antonia Perkins, Head of Customer Engagement Service, and Peter Andrews, Head of Risk and Information Governance. And can I start, I meant to say it earlier, we've all seen the notice about you deciding to retire, Deborah, which came in yesterday. Certainly to me, it's a huge surprise and a great sadness. And I just want to say at this point that you have attended so many of our Policy and Resources Select Committee meetings and been able to, A, get your points across, help your officers when they do their presentations, and you have been an incredible support to this committee for all the years that I've been chairman of it. And so it's a personal, and on behalf of current and past committees, I'd like to thank you for all the service you've done for us.
Thank you very much, Chairman. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Right, sure. So, having got that, who would like to kick off? Right, sure. Antonia.
Thank you, Chair. Is that loud enough? Great, thank you. So, Chair, this is the regular high-level performance report that this committee receives twice a year before it goes on to Cabinet. And it sets out the County Council's performance against the Serving Hampshire Strategic Plan. This particular report also provides an overview of Ombudsman determinations for the year. So once I've gone through the performance aspect and covered a few slides around the Residents' Forum Hampshire Perspectives, I'll hand over to Peter Andrews to talk to the Ombudsman section. So as previous serving committee members will be aware from previous reports, this judgment for core performance is based on department's risk-based commentary against the current set of performance measures. And this is also alongside the usual overview of key achievements that departments put forward, and also a real emphasis on external validation. In recent years, there's been an additional emphasis on various external judgments such as Ofsted inspections, awards or ISO certifications, just to add that additional layer of assurance in addition to the internal judgments. And you'll have seen in the report there's a full list of external validation at Appendix 1. Safeguarding and other major programmes of the County Council, including the financial strategy, are reported separately. So this is just purely the corporate performance side of things. And performance is judged against the 4 outcomes from the current Serving Hampshire strategic plan. The next item on the agenda will set out the proposed new strategic plan. So overall, performance in 2021 has been judged against those criteria I've just mentioned as good, which is remarkable given the intense strain and challenge services have faced from the pandemic, coupled with the ongoing pressure on the budget. And I've noted that flexibility and exceptional commitment from staff has in no way played a small part in this level of performance being sustained and the Council's resilience. The majority of corporate performance measures are either reported as low or medium risk, and only 3 have been identified as high risk, which I will give more information on in a second. Nearly half the targets were met at the end of this year, and most of our measures show improved or at least maintained performance during this year. So where targets aren't met, departments have in place a management programme or plan of work to make sure performance is improved in that area. So as identified in the report, 3 performance areas have been judged as high risk. However, this is a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic on performance. So firstly, CCBS, so the Culture, Communities and Business Services Directorate, income and school meal take-up was previously flagged in the 6-monthly performance report to this committee as an area of risk. As well as, yes, the uptake of school meals, but linked to, and this is very much linked to lockdown measures being lifted and return to classroom-based teaching, so that has improved over the year. The last area that's been judged as high risk is percentage of waste diverted from landfill to the household waste recycling centres. This is a slightly more difficult area to improve, as set out for the reasons here. However, this situation is being managed by the department, and it's anticipated that the situation will improve as we move further into recovery from the pandemic. So as I highlighted earlier, the performance report also contains a section on performance highlights. This is set out more fully in Appendix 2, and further detail around these particular items are set out there. However, the report does pick out a number of particular key achievements for this year, such as the Adults Health and Care Department winning an Amazon Web Services award for their wellbeing automated call service during the pandemic, which is where the clinically extremely vulnerable people were called by this automated service to check what support they needed and signpost them accordingly. You will be aware of the successful Southampton Freeport bid, which went through a couple of months ago. The County Council has also delivered our emissions target ahead of the 2025 target date, which, as I'll mention in the next item, climate change strategy is clearly a key programme of work for the County Council at the moment. And then there's been several areas where we've been recognised for delivering positive service and innovation in areas listed there. The Corporate Performance Report also provides a regular update to you on the Equality and Diversity programme in the County Council, and of late there's been a real focus on this work. Set out here are a few of the key areas that will be of interest to you. First of all, linked to the pandemic, there's been a significant amount of work with communities of ethnic minority communities and other target groups who are in particular at risk within the pandemic to ensure that they were receiving key messages from public health around vaccinations, self-isolation and so forth. So there's been significant work in that area which hopefully will provide a legacy to build on post-pandemic, where we've reached out and worked closely with community leaders with these particular groups. All departments have also undertaken recently a new self-assessment of their inclusivity and accessibility of their services, and those self-assessments are currently being looked at by the senior leadership. We've also had a recent inclusion and wellbeing survey with staff, which is tracking people's views and opinions and experiences over the past couple of years since the last survey. And there's also several measures around looking to support staff members' mental health and well-being, because obviously the pandemic has had an impact on them as well. And then just lastly, significant work was started in the last financial year to develop an inclusion strategy for the County Council. Work continues throughout this financial year on that, but that is another new initiative demonstrating the County Council's commitment to support this agenda. So in terms of the key corporate performance messages for year end, you'll see that performance has remained good. We've got a number of layers of assurance around that judgment, including external evidence and judgments. And good progress continues to be made against our Inclusion, Diversity and Wellbeing programme. And again, you'll see in terms of the recommendations to Cabinet, Cabinet is asked to acknowledge staff for their contribution to keeping performance at this good level during the pandemic and the absolutely extraordinary year that we have all lived. As mentioned earlier, members recall that a request has come from this committee from Councillor Porter to provide further information regarding the Hampshire Perspectives Residents Forum, which has recently been introduced. I've included this as part of this report due to the role the forum plays in influencing service development and engaging resident satisfaction. So this new online forum was introduced last September as just one of a number of ways in which residents are able to have their say and be involved and have their voices heard around the County Council services. The recent focus of this forum has very much been around the pandemic response and recovery, and it's been used as a tool by our corporate officer recovery group to put forward requests for surveys based on priorities, where they wanted to see how residents were feeling about coming back into town centres, etc., what their risk appetite is like, and so on. The forum has, at the moment, about 1,400 members, and we get about 700 to 800 responding to each survey. Anyone in Hampshire who's over 18 can sign up to it. And taking part is very quick and easy. We keep the surveys very short, so it takes about 5 minutes or so, but we try to have them frequently just to keep interest and involvement. Panel recruitment's ongoing. It's not a scientifically representative forum, it's indicative, the results are, so it's very much used in that manner, but we're always looking to recruit new members, and we're particularly looking to recruit members in areas that we're underrepresented in. For example, those aged under 35, residents particularly in Rushmore and Gosport, and looking to also engage directly with ethnic minority community leaders and representatives, asking them to promote the panel out to their communities. And I won't read that list out, but you'll see there we're undertaking quite a few activities to ensure that membership of the forum is continuously refreshed. People always have the opportunity to join, and we look to increase members wherever possible. And just lastly, on the Residents' Forum, this slide just sets out briefly some of the impact that this has had. So we've had quite a few surveys, probably once a month since September, with a pause over the pre-election period. And the topics to date have included travel and transport, digital connectiveness, people's attitudes towards vaccinations and rapid testing, and so on. And the results of these surveys has very much informed the ongoing work of the recovery group that I mentioned previously. It's been used to guide our social media campaigns, which hopefully you will have seen through Keeping Hampshire Safe. That branding has been very much informed by residents' views and concerns. The results also help influence a series of regular business intelligence meetings and forums that have been set up. And also the Swap to One local campaign was very much influenced by the results from the surveys, asking people what they might do to support more sustainable lifestyles, or where the pandemic might have changed their shopping habits. Chair, that concludes my presentation on the performance and Hampshire perspectives. Would you like to take any questions now, or shall I pass over to Peter for the Ombudsman section?
You have completed your presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Any questions? We'll start with
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Performance is all relative or comparative. You talk about assessing us at 61%, etc. These are internal assessments. This is internal scrutiny, correct? Do we have I know in highways and ETE we've got league tables, quiet league tables that the DFT puts out. Do we get measured against other counties in our performance?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Miller. So you're right in as much as the departments, the directors, report against their performance for their departments, and they make an assessment as directors against the measures that have been identified for them to support within the plan. However, what I would say is the majority of the judgments and the assessments that are made in this report are externally assessed. And one of the appendices, I think it's Appendix 2? Appendix 2 lists all those assessments. So we have made a significant shift in recent years to ensuring that this report is mainly based on external validation and assessments. In terms of the second part to your question, which is, are we compared with other local authorities? Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side of the fence you're on, we don't have one performance framework across local authorities now. We used to several years ago, but that no longer exists. So there are some measures you can make comparisons for. I won't list them, but there are some. And of course, Ofsted being a very obvious example. But there are also other measures like satisfaction with roads, those sorts of things. So it's a combination, but I can give you assurance, absolutely, that the majority of this report is based on external assessment.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
We can come back to you, or you want to reply to that?
No, there's no supplementary. The only other bit, if I may be permitted, just to ask a further question, is you mentioned of your 1,400 on the Hampshire perspectives. You mentioned places like Rushmore and Gosport, I think was the other area. Can we have a breakdown of where these 1,400, because it's online, it's difficult to trace, I know, but can we have an assessment of where these 1,400 come from?
Yes.
Because little is known of perspectives in my particular
we can absolutely provide you with how it looks at the moment in terms of the makeup, but as Antonio was saying, it does change on a fairly regular basis, but we can certainly give you the breakdown, yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
I was asked by the Vice Chairman, when you asked your first question, was there a page number that you could refer to? Was in particular?
I don't think this is a problem now, but I think the Chairman has indicated that if we do have a question, he wants us to discuss that topic before we move on to the next.
That's right, I knew that, but...
Yeah.
Well, it was a general inquiry invited by...
Let's have a let that go.
Okay.
Okay, don't worry.
Councillor Porter is next.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for that report. It's very helpful. And actually, I agree, the Hampshire perspectives, as we asked before, I think It would be useful if we are in any other meetings and there's information that we've gathered from the public, it would be useful to have that involvement and know that information in any paper. But my question is about page 12 and 13. The two of those expected impacts, which was the CCBS external income and the HC3S income, was to some extent expected. I mean, that was predicted. But I can't understand why the percentage of waste diverted from landfill by HWRCs is so affected when actually we had a booking system which meant that, well, certainly in one FOI we discovered that only something like 50% of the people that used to turn up, the number of visits, had reduced by 50%. So why does that, what's the explanation for that percentage of waste diverted from landfill to drop so dramatically?
Thank you, Chair. So there are several comparative factors on this. I think, first of all, that apparently the supply chain for taking the recycling onwards has been very much affected by the pandemic. And also social distancing measures actually at the HWRCs, the recycling centres, has meant that whereas staff could normally divert waste that was going to go into the general waste to the recycling, they weren't able to do that. So they've found that quite a bit of recycling was ending up in the waste container instead. So there are a couple of measures, but now things are being hopefully coming into recovery. The supply chain should be more positively affected, and we should be able to get more recycling into that.
Can I ask something that ties up with that, which I think we've been examining anyway? One of the points about this was about inclusion, and a lot of the emphasis was about staff and the way in which we can work with staff, which is really commendable. But I still feel that we are ticking the box rather on our inclusion statements, on our reports, and I wonder if you have been looking at that at all as part of the work on inclusion. So it's a genuine inclusion issue and equality issue.
Yes, so I think that the focus has been on internal inclusion for some aspects of it. However, the opportunity I think the pandemic has provided a great opportunity because there's been a real imperative to ensure that some of the communities who are particularly at risk in the pandemic are reached out to and generally engaged with. And part of the work that we've been doing over the past year is making sure that happens. So we've been working with community leaders from different ethnic minority groups and other sort of targeted groups to ensure they're receiving public health messaging. And in order to do that, we've set up various sort of processes, various online various forums, various links, which I think is something we can very much build on going forward, because now we have that relationship with different communities. We've started to work with individuals in different minority groups to support us in our research as well, which I think will be really positive. So we do have very much those networks in place to really build on going forward. I also mentioned those impact assessments that departments have been asked to complete for their services. So that's something that's been introduced and was undertaken at the beginning of this year. At the moment, we're working through the results of that to look at where improvements can be made. So that's very much as well looking at how we can mainstream even further that approach to ensuring all services are inclusive and the opportunities are very much there. So I think there is a real groundswell of work to make sure that we are even more inclusive as possible. But the pandemic has definitely given us some good platforms to use going forward, going into communities.
I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Porter, I just wanted to build on the response that Antonia's given you there, because I think you've made a very important point. And what the report highlights, as you quite rightly said, is the focus that we've been having corporately on the internal work. And what we haven't done such a very good job of is shining a light on the external facing work. when we need to do that, because what I do know is, and members here will know, that there's very good practice that goes on in the departments, in many of the services. I mean, we've been talking about external assessment there with Councillor Mellor, and of course Ofsted really drills down into that, the effectiveness of equality and diversity work of children's services. Adults will be another case, and so on and so on. But what we haven't done is pulled that together in a way that's really helpful and clear, and the inclusion strategy which Antonia mentioned will help us do that, because it will be internally facing and externally facing, and it will pull together all of those other things that Antonia has mentioned too. So we know we've got work to do, and I think it was a very helpful point you made, so thank you.
That's encouraging. I'll watch for it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's with respect to Hampshire Perspectives, which sounds a great initiative. I remember last year, when the pandemic started, I carried out a number of online surveys in our area to find out what residents were thinking about the response of various agencies and so on, and it provided a lot of useful information. So I can see that this would be very helpful. I can do what I can to stimulate Rushmore residents to participate, and I'm sure we'll get a number. The question I had really were two questions. First of all, I note that it's purely online, and of course one of the difficulties of if you're trying to capture the views of perhaps the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged in society is that they have difficulties online sometimes. And so I wonder if there's a way of looking at perhaps gathering that kind of feedback which is not online. And the other question is, it perhaps relates to the work programme under item 10, where there is an item there on consultation, and I wondered if the Hampshire Perspectives can be used for to extend the reach of public consultation that Hampshire is carrying out on various topics, because it seems to me a good opportunity if those people who are already committed to helping Hampshire look forward also give their views on the public consultation, and are invited to do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. So, just to be clear, Hampshire Perspectives provides us with one other mechanism for gathering views. So we have lots of other ways that we engage with residents and ask them for their feedback, some of which indeed is in person. So it will very much depend on the type of consultation, the subject matter, and the target reach. And so what we do is we think about that very carefully, and then we think about the best ways that we can engage with those individuals, either in that service area or in that geographical area. And that has included now, as Antonia was saying, during the pandemic, us being able to work much more closely with specific community leaders, and we've also got community researchers and community ambassadors that are working to help us do exactly as you have described. So I'm not saying that we've got it perfect, but we are very much aware of it, and we do our best to use lots of different types of channels or mechanisms. In terms of using Hampshire Perspectives for our key consultations, we are doing exactly that. So thank you for raising it. So members will know that we're currently out to consultation on the balancing the budget consultation, and we are using Hampshire Perspectives to help us gather views against that. So yes, we do. Thank you.
No, a perfect answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay? Good, excellent. Yeah, this hopefully this won't come under the category that you mentioned earlier of daft questions, but most of my questions are in that category, so Councillor Latham will probably vouch for that. Question really is issue on Part 17 on page 12 of the report, but also came out in the presentation, the issue of the high-risk areas. Just a question, if I may, on that. Obviously, I'm sure, and quite rightly, members will welcome the fact that we've identified the high-risk areas and the levels of percentage that we may be missing targets and so on. But what was missing from the presentation in the report, although maybe it's a matter for another committee, which is why this might be a daft question, is the implications of missing those targets, because it's all well and good saying we've missed those targets and we're aware of them and they're high-risk areas and so on. And I note that also I'm sure Chairman members will be reassured on the report that was given, or the presentation given, that the waste diverted from landfill is a matter that is being dealt with internally by the department. Is that a question of that, in that particular case, is that a question that once the COVID issues are over, then that problem will just go away? Or are there longer term implications of the fact that we've diverted more waste to landfill? Thanks.
Interesting question. Deborah.
If I can pick up the second part of your question first, Councillor Philpott. So what we are expecting is that the situation will improve, not necessarily be solved, but will improve, because it's a complicated process. And as Antonio was explaining, there's sort of a chain of activities that are involved in that. And of course, if that's something that you would like further detail around at some stage, Chair, you could request for ETE to come and give you more information.
Let's treat that as an action, okay? Thank you.
But Councillor Philpott, you've actually raised a really good point there around the implications, and we don't describe that very well, do we? So we describe the risk, but we don't describe what that means. So you're left with a bit of a so what question. So what does that mean in terms of the implications? So we will build that into reports going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Philpott.
No, that's fine, Jim. I have one more question, but it wasn't about the presentation.
What I'm doing here, Councillor Philpott, is because let's get this right. I'm coming back to you so that you can, if you've got any, you want to rebut anything you've just been told. We'll come to your other question later.
Now that was bound to happen. I misunderstood the rules.
No, it's all right. Others have got away with it.
No further comment, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, remember your question, and we'll. All right. Who's next? Thank you for that, Deborah. Councillor McCarter.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got a question on perspectives as well. I was trying to keep on topic with the previous question. I apologise for the being out of order. My question is about partnership working. I'm an East Hampshire District Councillor, and we have a programme called Let's Talk, which from my perspective looks very similar to Hampshire Perspectives. And I'm really interested in how much we coordinate with the districts who are asking what the residents look very similar sorts of questions, and they're trying to do the same thing the same sort of way. There's clearly overlap there and scope for improving both the depth and the width of what we're asking our residents if we coordinate more closely with our partners. Can you make a comment about whether there is any scope for working more closely with the districts and actually trying to aggregate and make sure the sort of questions similar can be aggregated from a district level up to the perspectives? Thank you.
So the short answer is yes, there is more work that we could do, and the second part really to that is that it's challenging and it is difficult. Interestingly, over the last year or so, as part of the response to the pandemic, the Local Resilience Forum has had a group which has been specifically designed to try and coordinate communications, media responses, and consultation. And that's actually worked really well. It hasn't meant that some activity hasn't been undertaken, so districts still have gone ahead with their planned activity and the County Council has gone ahead with its. But what it has meant is that combined source of information about Hampshire residents has been used really, really effectively to inform ongoing strategies and work. My understanding is, I think I'm right in saying this, my understanding is that group is going to continue because they have found it so useful. So that does provide us with quite a useful mechanism going forward. But yeah, it's hard to do. The Hampshire and Isle of Wight Chief Executives Group, I'm trying to avoid using any acronyms here, Chair. That group does, I know, talk regularly about consultations that are being undertaken, but often it's when they are in place, not before. So I do think there's work that we can do to improve that.
Well, yes, thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor McCarthy has asked a very important question, and if the leader was here, he would say that he'd already recognised the importance of that subject, and that's why I'm now executive member with responsibility for partnerships. And our objective is to make the existing two-tier system work as well as it can be made to work, and certainly better than it does at the moment. And that means that part of my brief is to go and talk to people like East Hampshire and see ways in which we can generate synergy for the people who live in this county. So the answer is yes.
Did I get your position wrong when I introduced you? You still did what we were doing before plus partnerships? Yes.
It's a complicated title, but yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was all stemmed from the presentations we've had in the last few years by the public health team, which have been really good about comparisons about what's happening in the districts. And I've been struck by how positive they've been and how much information we had in that part of what we're covering compared to some of the other parts, for example, the question I asked. So I think there's a really good example there to work on. So thank you.
Only to say I totally agree with that. It's been a very useful activity, and it's often the case, isn't it, when there is a joint and combined focus on something, people will actively work, and it gives them that momentum and drive to do so. It is a good example, and as Councillor Reid has said, I think that what we'll need to do is to use that as our foundation, because it's been a really positive outcome, and to see what we can do going forward. Thank you.
And Councillor Collett, is this... So did you...
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that on that, we, as a district council, we had presentations by the Hampshire Head of Public Health, which were attended by all the district councillors from both Havant and by East Hampshire. And that was really superb. To actually have a Hampshire official talking to district councillors in that way, I think helped the coordination enormously.
Interesting theme that's coming out so far is that we're talking about communication with our districts and boroughs, actually. Councillor Crawford's mentioned it, you're mentioning it. It's about feedback to other councils. Councillor Collett, is it on the subject?
No, different subject, Chairman.
Different subject, okay. Councillor Philpott, was that better?
He's got a new subject.
Right, yeah.
It's not a new subject, actually, so much as just an observation, if I may, and it was not necessarily on the presentation. It was on page 13, and just a question, really, on the second bullet point under supporting local economic growth and employment. Am I correct in saying, was it the Southampton Freeport, or is it the Solent Freeport? I thought it was the Solent Freeport. I know that sounds pedantic, but those of us who are geographically closer to Portsmouth might feel a bit... It matters to me, Chair.
Chair, I'm sorry, I don't know. We'll have to check for you.
Chair, I think it is Solent.
Solent. Yes. Happy with that? No, we're not doing that. Okay. Right. Okay.
It's actually quite an important point, Chairman, because the whole point of the Freeport is to enable things to come in, have value added to them, and then go out again, avoiding tariffs. That value doesn't have to be added on the dockside. It can be somewhere close by, and therefore Solent is a better name, even if it isn't the name, but I think it is.
Right. Who's next? Right, Councillor Collett, Adrian.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope a simple question. It's back on page 12, the issue of percentage of waste diverted from landfill by HWRCs. It might just be the terminology of how this is worded. But are we in a situation where any waste that cannot be recycled at HWRCs doesn't go into the energy from waste stream, and it goes
Could you say that again for my purposes?
Okay. Well, for household waste, anything that isn't recycled goes to energy from waste, and only the bottom ash ends up in landfill. The wording here, and it may be that the wording needs correcting, implies that anything at an HWRC that isn't recycled goes straight into landfill and not into energy from waste. And I just wanted to check, it may be that it needs answering separately, but I just wanted to check whether that was the case. Thank you, Chairman.
I don't want to, so I can guess the answer, but I don't want to guess. I think it would be better if we got the information from ETE to be absolutely sure, if that's okay. Sorry, Economic, Transport and Environment.
Does our select member for ETE have any idea of this?
I'll consult the officers, if I may, Chairman.
I would welcome that, Chairman, and it may be an issue that we want to pursue further.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so can we make sure that happens? Is it okay? Is that it? Okay, now I presume at this point we go on to the Ombudsman's report, is that right? Okay, yes. So please, Peter.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm the officer with responsibility for the County Council's corporate complaints process, and I'm also the County Council's link officer with the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, which is why you've got me here this morning. Well, hopefully this part of the report is fairly clear, but I'll give you a little bit more detail this time than I normally would. This report deals with those complaints that have already been through the County Council's internal complaints process and then have been escalated to the Ombudsman. And the figures that they have dealt with are outlined in paragraph 24. What I would say is that those numbers are relatively small given the size of the County Council and the large amount of difficult services we've been delivering in the last year. But those figures are roughly in line with previous years, and because the numbers are so small, it's very difficult for us to draw any kind of trend conclusions. The details of those individual decisions can be found in Appendix 3, and there I'd draw members' attention to the last column.
Chairman, yeah, what's happening on the screen? You want this up on the screen? What's happened to it? Is that possible?
Yes, apologies, I couldn't quite read my notes at the same time as present, but it should come up in a second, Chair.
Yes, but if you look at Appendix 3, you'll see the itemised individual cases of those 27 determinations. On the right-hand side of the table is the area that is a particular focus of the Ombudsman, and that's the remedy completed. The Ombudsman provides us with a very, very useful service to help focus service delivery, and the Ombudsman really does stress the importance of lessons learned from their determinations and the completion of the recommended actions from the Ombudsman. Well, there's also a section in the report on a specific case. Well, this is in response to a report issued by the Ombudsman under Section 30 of the Local Government Act 1974, and that's outlined, the reasons behind that are outlined in the report. Well, the Ombudsman requires such a public report to be considered at a high-level decision-making forum, and that's why in including this report within the broader annual performance report, this allows us to present the details of this case not only to the executive in the form of the cabinet, but also to yourselves in your scrutiny function and in the report that's seen by full council. So it's an open and transparent process. Well, the Ombudsman issued that report, published that report some few weeks ago, about 4 weeks ago, and I'm very pleased to confirm that this week we sent the formal response to the Ombudsman to confirm that all of the recommended actions within that report have been completed, all bar the formal presentation of that report, of this report, to Cabinet later in July. So we have completed all of the recommended actions in that case. Finally, the recommendations are outlined in recommendation 2 and 2C and 2D of the report. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Chair. I know we receive this each year, so we have gone through this previously, but could you remind me who determines the amount of compensation? Because they're quite random. There doesn't seem to be a pattern to them. Is that the Ombudsman determines how much it should be, and we just agree?
Yes, the Ombudsman has a detailed set of guidelines from which they make that decision on particular compensation, recompense to individuals. But they're also based on the circumstances of the particular case. So, as a specific example, there's in areas where there might have been some breakdown in the educational provision for an individual child, they will award a set amount per week of loss of education. So that's why the figures can vary quite considerably case on case.
Thank you very much. That's great. No, I was just keen to find out the difference between some of thousands and hundreds for the same similar issues.
So it was Tim.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, I noticed that the second bullet point here says the overwhelming majority of complaints to the Ombudsman are not investigated. Why is that? Presumably quite a lot of them are because the complaint's been too early before the internal process has been completed. But what one would like to know, and presumably some of them are rejected for other reasons, one would like to know what these other reasons are. And I'd also like to know how many complaints have been made to the Ombudsman during the last year, and how many were rejected for various reasons, and what were those various reasons?
3 questions there. Can you handle them all at once?
I can. I'm just making sure that I don't miss any. Right. Yes, you're absolutely right. The Ombudsman receives a large number of complaints over and above the 27 that they've investigated and made a decision on. They have a series of set criteria to make a decision on whether or not they investigate. By far, the reason why they decide not to investigate is related to what they call a premature complaint, i.e. that it hasn't had a chance to go through the full internal complaints process. But there are another number of other reasons. Sometimes complaints that they receive, although are directed at the county council, are not county council functions. They also make a determination about whether a decision is a particular complaint falls within the criteria of those complaints that they can investigate. So a number of issues arise that relate to cases where there are other fora for determining an outcome. And that may be a civil case or a family court or other judicial processes. And that's relatively a relatively high number of those occur. There's also some complaints that they receive where either they can see that the individual has not suffered and therefore they cannot progress that complaint on behalf of that individual. So if the individual hasn't suffered any detriment from the activities, then they will not investigate that claim, that case. How many cases have they received? Frankly, we don't know. We know how many that they come back to us and ask us for further details on, but we are not told how many cases they've received and they have decided not to investigate. Not anymore. They used to, but the Ombudsman has changed his focus, particularly in his annual reports, to move away from counting numbers to look at individual cases and the circumstances of those individual cases, the remedies that individuals have received or have not received. So it's very much about lessons learnt and completing the recommendations from the Ombudsman. And that's been a significant change of emphasis in the last 3 years.
So the short answer is we don't know.
So yes, we only know the number of the cases where they've told us we've got a case here. I'm afraid they just don't. The Ombudsman is very precious about the confidentiality in making a complaint to them. So they only tell us of the cases where they've made a determination or where they're seeking further information. And we do get quite a number of cases where they ask us further information and then they write back to us and simply say, well, thanks very much, but we're not going to take this any further, and we've written to the complainant to inform them of that.
Do we know that number?
Yes, but I don't have it with me. But I can provide that. I can provide the number of contacts from the Ombudsman. I can certainly do that.
So, if that's not a number you can give now, then please send it out to us, and we'll pass it. Louise will pass it on to all the members. Do you want to come back on that? I won't treat your last two comments as coming back on what you've been told, Councillor. So, do you want to come back on any of that? No. Jackie Porter.
Thank you, and it's very enlightening, this section of the report, actually. I'm conscious that there are 19 separate sections of this, but I'm not sure if some of them are for the same person. So that's the first question. The second thing is that it describes the lessons learned from this, but actually we had a scrutiny of EHCPs in 2019, and certainly some of these were ongoing then, and this wasn't raised. And I wonder, is there a responsibility to be informing the scrutiny department, the select committee, of any ongoing issues with this? How do you close with the complainant? You've described how you close with the council and with the Ombudsman. How do you close with the complainant? As a meeting, or as a letter, or just purely as a financial response? And finally, just I'd say that we must not be complacent about this. We know ourselves in our own mailboxes that I could repeat what some of these cases are from work that is ongoing every day. And so we know that only some people, the most confident people, will take something to an ombudsman. So how realistic are we in saying that this is just the tip of the iceberg? and that we should be much more conscious of what the Ombudsman says and what people complain about if we truly are representing the people of Hampshire's views on this.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. I can see that I'd like more questions on this subject because I think it's a really important one. Peter, do you want to come back on that?
Yes. Firstly, the 19 cases are all related to different individuals. The information to other scrutiny panels, I think you've made a very good point there, and it may be something that we need to take up with the departments concerned to ensure that it goes to the appropriate scrutiny panel. How do we close with the complainant? Well, that depends on the individual circumstances of the case. I think it's fair to say, and it'd be honest to say, that where cases are escalated to the Ombudsman, the relationship between the individual resident and the county council may have deteriorated or may be challenged, to say the least. In those circumstances, the intervention of the Ombudsman is valuable for us. In fact, it's essential. And they act as a way of building bridges. So we communicate through the Ombudsman to the individuals, but we also communicate to the individuals concerned. And the method of that depends entirely, as I said, on the case itself. So sometimes that will relate, sometimes that will mean a series of letters, emails, communication. In terms of social care, that's often more likely to be picked up by the individual frontline staff that are working with those particular families. So that will, in those circumstances, mean a series of meetings or face-to-face. Is this the tip of the iceberg? It possibly could be, but that's why it's so important that we report in this way to this scrutiny panel. That's why it's so valuable for us to be able to share this information with yourselves. That's it.
Yeah, it's something that we've been talking about, the triangulation of responses. I think as many of us as school governors, we know we have to triangulate the sort of comments that we see and hear and work through. And it's something we've been seeking, to hear the public voice. And this is a public voice. And I do ask this committee to consider whether this sort of work should be taken back to scrutiny, whether it's taken back as a confidential item or as a public item. I think it has a value to that department, and it holds our county council to account in the way in which we should do.
Look, I'm glad that you and Tim Davis have brought the subject up, because I actually went through this with a fine-tooth comb. So I'm bringing in my comments, okay, at this point. There were 18 upheld complaints in child services.
9.
How many?
Not all of them. No, one wasn't upheld.
Excuse me, okay. I must have missed one, all right.
Oh, one wasn't
Look,
upheld.
secondly, unless I've got my maths wrong, it's about 15,500 roughly paid out, and it looked like it's about 15,500 paid out in costs. It might have been more. There was some talk in the item about, a lot of it was about delays happening and people not getting things done in time. And judging from my own postbag, and I'm dealing with about 7 cases like this in my own postbag, which takes up an inordinate amount of time, that you get the impression, possibly from our end, that there's a shortage of manpower. And so that's the sort of question we need to be asking ourselves before this meeting's over. Now, I'm sure, I'd like the executive member for the Children and Young People to come in on this, because I know you've looked at this. Is that correct? Have you looked at the complaints and the upheld the upheld complaints that we've had and discussed.
I won't promote myself, but as the chairman of Children and Young Persons Select Committee, we did look at the
That's what I thought you had.
Yeah.
And what did you come up with? What results did you come up with?
There was an increase in staffing, and the numbers were going in the right direction. We look again and coming up in the work programme, but it seemed to be going in the right direction.
Right. You see, the rest of the committee are seeing this for the first time. Was there a lot of angst at your committee? Probably one I missed. When this was discussed, was there a lot of worried members about this? Were there a lot of worried members?
Yeah, certainly each member can recollect cases that they involved with in their area, and yeah, we can raise that. There's obviously the officers don't like to go into specific details on each case because it can become obvious to people that may be listening who you're talking about. So that you have to be a bit careful with that. But yes, it's something that's shared across the county. Each member can.
Look, forgive me, I'm going to carry on. I want to press on this. We're not interested in the cases. What we're interested in as a committee is the department functioning? From your point of view and the CYP Select Committee point of view, is the department functioning at its best possible ability in terms of the casework that they do? Because it doesn't look like it.
Well, I think what we drew from when it featured at committee was that there had been issues, but they were addressing them, and the numbers had gone a long way to being back into the statutory amount of weeks that it takes to deliver a EHCP.
Okay, I think that's about what I'm going to get from that. My question, therefore, is the department, what is the department actually doing right now to ensure that, for example, in a utopian world, we don't get any more upheld cases against us? What are they doing in terms of manpower and dealing with cases and dealing with them fast? What are they doing about it? Because it's something that I'd like to see come back either to here or to your committee.
That puts me in a difficult position personally because I don't work for Children's Services, and I think it's more appropriate that a response comes from the Children's Services Department rather than me.
I understand.
What I can say, Chairman, in broader terms, that the area of special educational needs is an area that the Ombudsman has focused very particularly. And his determinations are published on his website. And if you go to the website, you will see a very large number of determinations along similar lines to those that you're seeing here today from every local education authority. It isn't an issue that is specific to Hampshire County Council. It is a system-wide issue, I would say.
It's not just us that's got this problem, it's every council.
Absolutely.
So are you saying that the figures that we've got here, where there are 4 adult health care problems, or 5 maybe, okay, and there are 19, as I've now been told, on children's services, that is pretty common throughout the country?
I'd say that it is not significantly different from other large local authorities that have those responsibilities.
I'd like to hear more debate. Does the committee here, do they want to see the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee look at this again, now that we've got this information?
Can I just reassure you, we are looking at it again. It's coming up in the work programme.
When is that happening?
We reviewed the work programme last week, but I can't tell you a date to hand because there's some shift. But I can come back to you when it's.
I think we'd like to get a report. Not necessarily, I don't know if it would be your job, but a report. When you've done this, okay, I'd like to see a report of the findings of the committee shared with us. And what I'm interested in, and I hope others are, basically, does the department have enough officers dealing with these cases, which we know are getting more numerous and very complicated? That's the sort of thing we're going to want to see.
We can definitely.
Does the rest of the committee agree with me on this? Any dissent? Okay, can we treat that as an action, please? I think you were first, Bill.
Mr. Chairman, having looked at that, I would also aim to check whether it's on the HASC work programme, and if it isn't, to put it on it.
Okay, we've got a HASC chairman here. That's you, isn't it? All right. You're going to make sure that happens. Good. All right. And so have you finished, Bill? Tim.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, it's said that, we seem to have a disproportion of complaints relating to children's services, but you say that sorry, I'll move my head across. And that seems to be representative nationally. Now, there must be some councils that actually have relatively low levels of these complaints. Could we actually find out why they do, learn some lessons, and do something about our process in consequence?
As far as I'm concerned, that's scrutiny working at its best, and that really is placed at the door of Kirsty, your committee, to ask the officers to do that before they report to you at the next item. That's why we have select committee members here. Can you do that?
I would throw the comment on its head and say perhaps our figures are lower than some of the other councils.
No. He wants to know the figures.
We will endeavour to find out if they hold them.
So you can. So basically, when this meeting's over, you can have a chat with your officer. Say, when we discuss this on the work programme, that information can come out. They can start asking questions. We're not trying to make you do your job, but our job is to basically get to the bottom of this. Otherwise, it'll go on. Do I get a? Is that a yes? Can you ask your officers to follow that up? The question that Tim's. Oh, sorry, Deborah, you could have shouted at me. Yeah.
Chair, thank you. What I would say is that I know, without even giving it a second thought, that the Director of Children's Services, Steve Crocker, will be able to provide members here with a very clear explanation as to why we have these figures and how we compare with other local authorities. You know what I'm going to say next, members, that our children's services is one of the few outstanding children's services in the country, and so I would guess that we have probably some of the best practice across the country. But that doesn't mean to say that members shouldn't be scrutinising it and that you shouldn't have the data. But I know that Steve Crocker will be able to provide that very easily.
I don't know if I can provide any reassurance to the committee, but one of the recommendations in the Ombudsman Report is basically, have you got a plan to sort this out? And I can confirm from the information that we've passed on to the Ombudsman, yes, there is a comprehensive improvement plan in place that is working to redress the delays on special educational needs cases going forward.
That's very helpful. I certainly think that this time next year, I presume we look at this every year, do we? Yes. Yeah. Well, whenever that we have it on the agenda, so we get an update. Are you all agreed on that? Yes, agreed. Yeah. Thank you for that, Peter. Are there any other?
Well, there have been a number of people who put hands up
on this subject.
Last quarter. I don't know whether it's that subject. The next person in line to ask a question is Councillor Crawford, but I don't know whether it's
right.
On
Okay.
this issue.
Were there any other hands up on this one subject? Right. Councillor Crawford, then Councillor.
Collick, and then Councillor Philpott.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased to hear your rather forceful stance on this, because I do think it is. I mean, I've almost been shocked by the volume of issues that have been raised in Aldershot on this very topic, with extensive delays, still being reported. And so I have had the opportunity to see a response from the executive member for Children's Services, and it emphasises the excellence of the department, and as we've heard from the officer here, about the steps in place. But it does seem to me that it's not quick enough, because we're still having these delays. And so it then comes down to, it's a matter of how much more resources might be needed in order to sort it out to the satisfaction of the parents and indeed of the children who are being affected by that. And the other thing is, in terms of interpretation of the Ombudsman's reports and how the County Council presents that to the public, it seems to me that there's care needed, and perhaps this is where Hampshire Perspectives could do a job, would be to have some kind of survey about this issue. Because if it, as you and I have found, there's a number of complaints ongoing in our different districts, it would be useful to collect this information on a county-wide basis. So those are my particular comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. My question's been answered during the discussion, and I support the general thrust. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll be very brief, actually, and that is just to say that it's somewhat in defence, if you like, of my colleague, really, as the Select Committee Chairman. This is a very complicated and sensitive area of work, and it's not too surprising that there's quite a lot of conjecture and issues relating to it, I would suggest. I think also that we might want to, or the Select Committee, when they look at this for Children's Services, might want to look at it and see how it compares with previous years, because the year that in question is 2020 to 2021, many staff have been working from home in that period, and I think really there needs to be looked at in context. So rather than jump to any conclusions at this stage, I think we're all reassured, Chairman, that the Chairman of the Select Committee has told us that it will be.
That's right. I'm glad you're reassured. Obviously, we are aware of the difficulties of the last year, but we can't let this sort of issue just go by without us actually deciding how we're going to look at it. Okay, and it was not a personal attack. Certainly, I'm sorry, Kirsty, because I can see you, on the way the Scrutiny Committee has been running. We just want to make sure that it's going to be revisited, and there will be questions that we ask that we would like to see answered. And if it's coming up in the work programme, that's a great opportunity to get some answers.
Just to say that this report that Peter's presented is about the Ombudsman section, so therefore the P&R Select Committee is here to scrutinise that part, not the part of Children's Services Department, which is the function of the Children and Young People Select Committee. So we're just veering into another Select Committee's remit rather than our own. So just to be careful and note that. And that Kirsty has already said that it's featuring on her work programme later in the year. So it's up for them to scrutinise this level of detail within that department, not for this committee.
That's why I have been asking the executive member to see if she can.
But it will be minuted and it will be online.
Not the executive member, I'm sorry, the chairman of scrutiny to do just that.
We're just veering into their role rather than ours. So just to make
I
that
did
point.
say earlier that we have the right to ask any committee to take on work if we so wish. It's not our work. I'm well aware of that. It's the work of that committee and the department. So basically we're a happy bunch of policy and resources members at the end of the day. That's really important. And it looks like it's going to happen. Councillor Withers.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask whether on the Hampshire County Council website, under this sort of section, we have a link to the Ombudsman report, giving the public basically the information here about what has been investigated, what's been upheld, what hasn't been upheld, because it seems to me, again, there's a gap in communication between the excellent service that we're providing and actually the excellent service you're providing, and actually the public needs to see jointry on that that aspect.
Right. So clearly the papers relating to this committee in terms of this report are published. In terms of the specific report under the Section 30 notice, that the summary of that report has been published in the local media. We are required to do that by the Ombudsman. We're required to publish it in two local newspapers, and we have done so. A link to the ability to request a document, that document is also included, both in both of those public notices. But we don't make a direct link on our complaints website to this particular report, but it's certainly something we can consider and take forward.
Can I just come back on that? I mean, the fact that you publish it in the public media, that's the point I'm making. You know, if it comes out on the Hampshire media that we get on a daily basis, again, we have the ability then to pass on that information to the relevant bodies to ensure, particularly school governors, that actually this is an item which is taken very seriously.
Thank you.
Huggins, yep, that's okay. Thank you very much. I think for me, just an observation that it is about continuous improvement, and I think developing critical friendship is really important, especially when we look at changes to social and emotional needs, especially with the impact of the pandemic. I think for me, just looking on page 55, where the Ombudsman details service improvements following this report, it most probably is that I would like feedback on, because it does talk about capacity, it talks about backlogs of EHC plans, and it does talk about SEND recovery plans. So specifically, that would be really good to have that feedback.
Thank you, Chair. So this second report sets out the proposed new strategic plan for 2021 to 25, as well as the proposed amendments to the corporate performance framework, which sits alongside it. The strategic plan is revised every 4 years to coincide with the new administration, and it very much provides the overarching framework for the County Council, which guides all decision making. So this will be considered by Cabinet on the 13th of July, and then we'll go on to full council. So just briefly, a number of activities were undertaken to provide this refresh. Departments' business plans and other key documents which sit underneath it were reviewed to understand the principal areas of focus for services. Those are obviously built on a lot of activity and research and consultation themselves. So we reviewed those to see what needs to be drawn out. We also look back at feedback from residents from surveys and consultation exercises over the past 4 years to pull out any key themes that need to be reflected in the new strategy. Members will be aware of the Hampshire 2050 Commission of Inquiry. The leader was particularly keen that due to the significant amount of work that went into that inquiry, the inclusion of the strategic priorities and recommendations identified by that body of work were included in the new strategic plan. So hopefully you'll very much see that going through the DNA of the new strategic plan as proposed. And then any priorities for national bodies such as the County Council Network or the LGA Local Government Association were reviewed and, where relevant to residents of Hampshire, drawn into the new plan. So as you'll see, we take into account, when we're refreshing the plan, the wider policy context. We look at the leader's direction around the 2050 Commission of Inquiry. And of course, we very much look at the priorities around recovery from the COVID pandemic, particularly the impact of the health and social inequality that was really highlighted by the pandemic and the need to advance social equality. That's very much been brought into the new plan. So we're keeping the strategic outcomes, the very high level outcome from the previous strategies. They're still at the previous plan because they're still very much relevant. So the first two are around maintaining a strong, resilient economic growth and prosperity and making sure people live safe, healthy and independent lives. So that layer in the plan is maintained. However, we have looked at refreshing the specific priorities underneath there. So in the first one, you'll see the focus here is around some of the Hampshire 2050 recommendations. And then in the second outcome, we continue that emphasis on ensuring the County Council's resources are put where they're needed the most, and we're exploiting technology to innovate wherever possible to provide a more efficient and yet still effective service. The next two outcomes, they stay around people enjoying a rich and diverse environment in Hampshire, and people enjoy being part of strong, inclusive, resilient communities. But again, we look at the priorities underneath that. The County Council's real focus on climate change is clearly there in outcome 3, and also looking around to maintain or striving to attain environmental net gain. That was a recommendation from the 2050 Commission, and that's defined as the aim to reduce pressure on and achieve overall improvements in ecosystem services and the benefits they deliver for people and nature. So that's been woven into that one. And then lastly, in outcome 4, you can see that resilience and inclusivity is very much a priority there, and we're very much recognising the key role of the voluntary sector. The voluntary sector has absolutely always been a key partner for the County Council, but we've really seen the benefits and the need for that relationship over the course of the pandemic, and so we're looking to build on that and support them in being sustainable throughout the recovery. So those outcomes very much set out the what part of the strategic plan, what the County Council aims to do, and detail. The plan is necessarily very high level. The detail around those can be found in departments' individual service plans. This slide sets out the how part of the strategic plan, how we intend to work as a county council, and you'll see there the list of what we'll do to keep residents at the heart of everything that we do around inclusivity, around engagement, around the use of taxpayers' money. And then just lastly from me on this presentation, alongside the strategic plan, we have the corporate performance management framework. The report you received previous to this item is part of that framework. So we're looking to refresh the plan, so we're also making sure that the new framework reflects that and reflects the new emphasis that we're bringing out in the new plan. So just briefly going around this diagram, starting at the bottom, the achievements element that we report to you in Cabinet and external validation is remaining the same. We have streamlined the departmental performance measures going forward. They're currently being just looked at, but in future reports you will see a change there. In terms of new elements that we want to bring in, You'll have a quarterly director's performance assessment, which just adds that additional layer of commentary and assurance around activity in their area. We will link to the annual Hampshire 2050 monitoring reports that go to Cabinet as well to ensure those recommendations are being delivered on. Within the narrative section of the report, you saw that the inclusion, diversity and wellbeing work was reported in the item just before this one, as well as Ombudsman. However, we're going to bring in a narrative around progress against the climate change strategy to again reflect that emphasis in that key work programme. And yeah, so the sum of that will make up the new performance management framework. So you can see it's reflecting the new highlights in the strategic plan, as well as maintaining what has gone before quite successfully. Further detail around these elements and their reporting intervals set out in Figure 1 and Figure 2 within the report. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. I congratulate the officers on the work they've obviously done in pulling this all together from a number of different strands. But I have a fundamental question that I think we need to address, which I'm addressing to councillors rather than officers. And that is, shouldn't we as members be more involved in the early evolution of where we're going over the next 4 years? What the officers have brought forward is a very good summary of all the other things we've discussed in the past. But we're being basically asked to nod this through or make minor amendments to it, and I think there are some fundamental issues that need to be thought about. One simple example is that because of budget pressures, a number of services have had to be changed or reduced over recent years, which require more need to travel. Yet we're reducing the support to travel, particularly on bus services. In a county where between 85 and 90% of people can drive, that means between 10 and 15% can't and rely on other forms of transport. That's a lot of people in a county of 1.5 million people. Another example is the third strategic aim talks about a rich and diverse environment. And a lot of people work very hard to look after their homes and their gardens and make them good quality environments for themselves as much as they can. And then they step out onto our pavements. And our pavements in many places are in a dreadful state. Very bad if you're frail, in being able just to walk along some of our pavements because they're so poor. Very bad in terms of their visual appearance, the physical environment and the quality of where you live. Grass cutting standards that mean that while you're trying to keep your garden nice and weed free or whatever, the grass outside the garden is dominated by dominant weeds like dandelions and so on that then flow into your garden. The grass is often long before it's cut, and when it is cut there's clumps of dead grass around. Broken road signs that take ages to be fixed. Dirty road signs that you can't read. There are all these things about the physical environment which are a real thing in people's lives but don't seem to me to be addressed here. And it seems to me those are the sort of issues we as members should be discussing before we get to a stage of having a report going to Cabinet for approval. It seems to me there's a big stage missing in the process. Maybe what we needed was a consultative event for members to put forward their thoughts or concerns. Maybe members may not agree with the points I've raised, but the point is we haven't had that dialogue. Thank you, Chairman.
Since that really wasn't sent to an officer to respond, I'm very happy for an officer to respond. Take the pressure off me just for the moment. Deborah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collis. I do take your point. It's a difficult one. This strategic plan is, I'm going to answer your question in sort of 3 different strands, if I may. It's a difficult one because the strategic plan is necessarily very high level. So, as Antonia said, it sets out some very high level generic and strategic priorities under which sit a whole range of specific plans and assessments which have informed those priorities. And so in terms of the consultation, what we have done, rightly or wrongly, is said, well, this is all fact, this is all evidence-based, and therefore it's telling us that these should be our priorities. I'm not disputing that there should have been consultation, I'm just saying that's the kind of rationale. Secondly, the majority of the plan is pretty much reflects what was there before for the same reasons, because all the evidence base supports that. And also, as Antonia has said, the leader was very keen that we aligned it as closely as possible to the outcomes of the Hampshire 2050 Commission. Now, the Hampshire 2050 Commission, as you know, was consulted on extensively with partners, with various, well, we had commissioners, of course, with the public, with members. So it's sort of, in our defence, if you like, for want of a better word, we felt that there was quite a lot of consultation that had gone into bringing this together. But I would guess, though, Chair, that if there are gaps that you feel, Councillor Collett, should be addressed at this point, we could make those changes and make those recommendations to Cabinet. But that's the rationale behind how we've got to where we've got to, and why we are confident that the content reflects the strategic priorities.
Yes, I think you might find that Councillor Collett will say, I need more time. Okay, but I see Councillor Collett's point, and I can see that we've got to get on with business. So that's the dilemma that we've got. Do we have a members' briefing coming up between now and the Cabinet?
I think Cabinet is on the 13th of July, and I think the member briefing programme's on the 15th, but I know that because of where we are in the election cycle, there's probably pre-filled slots already taken, so there wouldn't probably be opportunity to have anything until much later in the year.
Chair, may I just say something else?
Yes, please.
Because I do take Councillor Collett's point very seriously, but I think in terms of, and it's been reflected in the discussions today, that as Councillor Collett has quite rightly said, that residents hold us to account on the impact of these activities, which we will be reporting. So unless there's a significant gap in what you think should be reflected in the priorities, what we can do is take your concerns and make sure that the measures that we report against are effectively reported here and to Cabinet going forward. Would that be a sort of a compromise? And I think then what we can do for the next plan, if there's not sufficient time now, is make sure that we do build in consultation with members. It is like a bit like painting the fourth bridge, though. With this plan, to be frank, it's such a difficult thing to pull together and get everyone's agreement on, which is why we rely so significantly on our evidence base.
Thank you for that. Before I bring you back in, because we're stymied by the pandemic, we've been stymied by the fact we've had an election. So therefore, an awful lot of things just stopped happening, certainly for most of us in April, May. I think your point's very valid. How do you get member input into the minutiae into such a major design? And as long as how we would actually get members to, let's say, write into the department and say, I'd like something done about this and that, can you please make sure that's installed? I don't want to delay the work that we're doing. We need to move this on. But we have to, is there any way of asking members to write into the department? That's really that's the simplest way of doing it. Have you got any comments on computer that you'd like to add to the department's work on this one subject?
And Councillor Collett, if there's anything specific, do write to me, and Antonio and I will build it in for you.
Well, that's a start. Good, thank you both. Next. Councillor, are there anything else on that subject? Councillor Crawford.
If I may just briefly add, Chairman, I've already done what was suggested, found out from the department about the action, for example, on the issue of weeds and so on the pavements, and I learned that the next and one and only spraying of weeds in Aldershot will be on the 23rd of August. Now, that may be all that can be afforded within the strategic framework, but it doesn't do the reputation of the county council any good, because that is the public face of the county council, is the state of the streets and pavements. But that was just to follow on from what Councillor Collett was saying. But it's the reputation of the county council. All the good work on the high level and important services, for many people counts for naught if they are faced with that on a daily basis. But that's
actually, can I just, it's a fair point. I use Facebook for this sort of thing. When we had the transport consultation that came up a couple of months ago, I went on Facebook and just asked people, I want your input. And I got hundreds of emails in, or Facebook replies, and I sent the whole lot up to the ETE department. They'd never seen so many, but that actually is a much more effective way of getting the public's input, not just councillors. So I recommend to everybody, put it on Facebook, just ask it as a question and see what comes in.
So if I may, Chairman, my question about the strategic outcomes in relation to the presentation we've had, I had two questions. First of all was about outcome number 2, point number 6, I think it is, about those groups in our communities who have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And I wonder how these groups are being identified, because one of the issues that has come up, and it's been massive in the press in the last couple of days, has been the very high percentage of people who have had COVID who then become subject to the condition of long COVID. And it seems there may be tens of thousands of those in Hampshire alone. And they would, in a sense, there are support groups for them. And I wonder if Hampshire, in this particular strategic outcome, would seek to engage with a group like that, or is it just established groups? That was really my question about that. And
is that, sorry? Yes, Chair, thank you. So we work very closely with public health in terms of identifying these groups. There's clearly, as you just said, lots of national research around the groups that are particularly impacted, and particularly at different stages of the pandemic. So ethnic minorities at one point were a very high risk. Clearly those suffering from long COVID are another group that's specifically impacted. So we work closely with public health and also organisations like the Citizens Advice Bureau and our councils of voluntary services. So they obviously work then with voluntary groups throughout Hampshire. There's a lot of work that's been coordinated between those particular organisations to help identify who needs help, what support is required, and to coordinate that. And in particular, from government, we've been given a Contain Outbreak Management Fund grant to really help in this sort of issue. So we have funded the voluntary sector in several occasions, as well as Citizens Advice, to help us identify these sort of groups and work out what sort of help they need. So yes, I completely agree with you that that is a key group for us to support, and there are quite a few projects and programmes in place to make sure that we are out there giving the support where it's needed.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. That's an excellent answer for that one. The next point is about the following point. It's on outcome 4, the point 5, about the Armed Forces Covenant, if I may. That we've had the census this year, and I think the census will show that there are now thousands of Gurkha veterans living in Hampshire. Many of them in Aldershot, but we also have them in Eastleigh and other Winchester and so on. But the question is, how does the Armed Forces Covenant extend to those particular veterans who are living in Hampshire, and many of them are impoverished and living in poor conditions?
Is that a question that can be answered today, or is that something that has to be gleaned?
No, I could answer that now, Chair. In Hampshire, we're fortunate to have a very strong civilian-military partnership. So not only is that represented by different departments within the county council, such as education, adults, social care, children's and so on, but it's also various military charities are part of that, and representatives from the various garrisons throughout Hampshire. So we've got very strong links with a range of different organisations who will represent like the Gurkha veterans and so on. So there's quite a lot of work that goes on to sort of see where we can provide support, make sure our services are mindful of the covenant and what that means. You might be aware that at the moment Parliament are looking to make consideration of the covenant statutory duty for us. Unfortunately, we are already pretty well on the way to already considering that as a key duty for us because we've been so supportive of this agenda for quite a while. You mentioned the census. I think once the results from the census come out, that will really help us target support where it's needed. Obviously, we know that there will be a large contingent of veterans in Rushmore and Winchester and so on and so forth, but having that information will give us a much better idea of the scale and location of the veterans, so we can work with our partners to really ascertain what support's needed, what difficulties there are. So yes, just to assure that it's very much a key agenda for us. I think things like the census will really help us target that support.
Thank you. The public are being asked to respond to a budget consultation by the 8th of July, which appears to hold some points within it that are in direct opposition to the strategic plan, which will be published on the 13th of July. So will the contents of the responses back from the public consultation on the budget and the balancing the budget be part of the response on the 13th of July to Cabinet? I do realise that essentially the strategic plan is a document that's endorsed by Cabinet and it is effectively their strategic plan. But I wondered how the two tie together. There's a very strong message, for instance, in here about partnerships and about charities and the third sector. And actually one of the points in the balancing the budget is about reducing the support for that particular group. I just wondered how the two marry together and how it will be addressed.
So what you want to know that the public response and the county input are going to be married together for the Cabinet?
For the Cabinet discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. It's a good question. So, yes, of course, the outcomes from the balancing the budget consultation will definitely be used to inform all service planning going forward. And what you'll be aware that when a report is taken to Cabinet in future, it has to demonstrate how it's supporting these priorities. And so it will give us the opportunity then, I think, to pull out anything which is incongruent with what we've set out here. But that particular issue with the service-specific grants to the voluntary sector, I do realise could mean a reduction to them. But you'll also be aware that for many years we've been able to maintain our infrastructure support, and we have been able also, through this grant that Antonia mentioned, give them significantly more this year. We're going to be working with them as closely as we can to help the sustainability. But I know you didn't want to get into the detail, you're just showing that as just raising that as an illustration. But we will make sure that the feedback is properly evidenced against the plan.
I imagine the best thing to do is to have a paragraph which brings in the public response within that representation for Cabinet.
Yes.
Does that suffice?
It does, except it's a very tight deadline. Obviously, the papers will have been produced before, for the Cabinet, will have been produced before the outcome of the balance the budget consultation. Well, so I'm just conscious of the challenge of the two marrying together.
I do think that we do have the opportunity. I mean, although this is, what I've said before, it's a very high-level document. It sets out the strategic priorities. It's not something that necessarily needs to be set in stone for the next 4 years. And so if we need to make changes to it to reflect the current situation, we can do that. We can update the measures. We can update the particular focus to ensure that it remains relevant. Because 4 years is actually quite a long time anyway. So we'll do our best to do it. And you're quite right around the, for priorities. You're quite right around about the tightness of the deadline, which is unfortunate. But as the Chair has mentioned, COVID has restricted us somewhat in terms of timing around some of this.
Will that do?
We'll do our best to do it anyway.
And hopefully, well, I'd say hopefully, but the final one is Councillor Miller.
Thank you. It's just a quick one, really. Councillor Collett addressed he articulated, I may say, his piece to the councillors in respect of all the highways and ETE associated problems. It's quite simple. There's been work programs. I've been on ETE for 5 years. Every time we've developed something, we've always had a budget cut in ETE. We do not get the same share by any of the appropriate budgets. When there's been cuts in the transformation programs, ETE's suffered. And without money, without resource, you cannot develop on some of the ideas that Councillor Collett's just put forward. It does become a financial situation rather than a work group and focus.
Look, we all understand that. I'm speaking for all of us here. But we have to live in hope that maybe one day we can get some of these things back. At the moment, we have to live within our means. But hopefully, if we continue to remind the council about the things that are missing, we might get them back. It's our job. You happy with that? Thank you for your comment. Okay. That appears to be everybody. Is there anybody who feels a real need to make another point, ask a question, get into further debate? If not, we're going on to the page 57, which are the recommendations for the Serving Hampshire Strategic Plan. And we note the proposed new Serving Hampshire Strategic Plan 21 to 25 with the comments that have been made. And we note the proposed changes to the Corporate Performance Management Framework. All in favour? I think that's definitely almost everybody. Thank you very much. And now we go on to 9. We'll hopefully get through this fairly quickly. The annual report of the Select Committee. Who's right, Louise? This is the report that goes to full council.
That's exactly it, members. This report is detailing a summary of all the other Select Committees' work throughout the year, which needs to be considered and approved by you for recommending to full council when it meets in July. Thank you.
I hope you've all read it, especially those who have a big interest in their own areas. So I don't want to go through it, but does anybody have any comments, changes, or any issues arising from that report? Because otherwise it'll be presented as with full council. Anybody? Right. Therefore, we go to the recommendation that the Policy and Resources Select Committee approves the summary of the work of each of the Select Committees over the past year for submission to the County Council as a Scrutiny annual report. And can I thank at this point all the past chairmen of the Select Committees that have been involved in this, and to thank all the current ones that are still with us. I think it's you, Kirsty, is that correct? Right, so that's all agreed? The work programme, this, you all had a chance to see it. We've obviously got stuff coming up. I will reiterate that we'd like to hear from members if there's any overarching issues for the County Council that they think we should be looking at, either from the debates that we've had today or in the thinking that you might take time to have between now and the next meeting. Because we want to hear it, we will take it on board, and if we think it's the sort of issue that we should be looking at as a P&R committee, we'll take it on board and we will put it into the... Yes, Councillor Crawford.
It's really with respect to, on page 97, where it's mentioned about consultation policy. I've sensed a general, a certain amount of dissatisfaction with the council's consultation policy, certainly in residents in our area, where it's seen as just being a token. So, and therefore people are a bit loath to participate. And I just wonder if there's anything can be done to have a look at it in terms of this committee in order to see whether there may be improvements that are made. I noticed that it was reviewed, but it's a review's been outstanding for some time now.
It's a fair point. That was the reason it came up in the first place, Councillor. And we can always improve on it. Oh, yes. I'll just finish what I'm going to say. So, we will be bringing it back into the committee at some point. Councillor, sorry. I'll make you, since you're leaving, we'll now call you Councillor, shall we? Right.
May I just clarify? Is it about the wording of the policy, or is it about how we carry out our consultations?
It's not about the wording of the policy, because generally speaking, the public wouldn't be aware of that. It's more about the way that the policy, the consultations are framed. Sorry, it's more about the way the consultations are framed and the questions are framed, and so on. The comments often made that these are leading questions, leading to the answers the council wants, and that kind of thing. So so that's why people may be loath to respond. I don't know what the relevant proportions of responses are from different districts, but that's something that I pick up.
I realise, Chair, that you don't want to debate here now, but what I will say is that, just in defence very quickly, is that we follow good practice and national guidance and the law in terms of the way that we consult to the letter, and we are recognised as having extremely good practice. So it might be one to come back here for debate, so at least the officer who leads on consultation, who actually reports to Antonia, can come back and explain how and why we carry out consultations in that way. That would be helpful.
That's a very good idea. We'll treat that as an action. And can I just remind you, you will get tremendous public replies if you go on Facebook. You don't actually get involved in a discussion, because that won't do you any good as a councillor, but what you do is just ask the question, and you'll get replies coming in from the most unlikeliest of sources. You can decide which ones you want to send up to head office. Very effective. Are there any other comments? Tim, sorry, was he next? Bill Withers. Tim.
This was a completely different topic. I noticed that we pre-scrutinised the savings programme in September, revenue budgets and the capital budgets in January. Does this council actually have a medium-term financial strategy?
It certainly does.
Why are we not scrutinising that?
We have. I'll let you answer that.
I think it's going for, I'm not aware, but I think it's going forward to Cabinet in July, so it normally come here, but I'd have to ask the reason why it's not come this time. For the finance officers.
You, Tim, you look very unhappy. Are you,
Well, it rather looks as if we've missed the boat.
I might remind you that we've been through an election, we've been through a restart. That's one potential answer that you're going to get. The point is well made, because we normally do look at the medium-term financial budget.
I can find out and give you an email, Councillor Davies.
We normally do. Right. Apart from that, do we agree the work programme and any amendments that may come in as necessary? Agreed? Yeah. Okay, I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance, for your input, and I look forward to meeting you all again at our next